A sloth, a donkey, and a curious human. Send a prompt and see what they're doing. One hits record with a question on his mind. Two brothers pick it up, see what they find. Corn takes his time, Herman's got the facts. Back and forth, they never hold back. My weird prompts, come on in, that's where we begin. My weird prompts, glad you're here.
This episode was generated using artificial intelligence. Please verify facts.
You know, Corn, this whole show runs on GPU compute, and we wouldn't be here without Modal.
Seriously. And that's what powers all our text-to-speech. Everything you're hearing right now.
They're an AI infrastructure platform. Developers use them to run GPU workloads in the cloud with zero infrastructure headaches.
If you're building anything with AI, check them out. Modal.com. So Daniel sent us this one, and it is a bit of a look behind the curtain. He wrote to us saying he wants us to explain the latest change to the My Weird Prompts pipeline. Specifically, how we are now generating these longer episodes, the 30-minute plus deep dives, using an agentic chunked approach with Claude Sonnet 4.6. He wants us to dive into why naive one-shot prompting fails for long-form content, how a planning agent plus subagents per segment solves the coherence problem, and how this generalizes to things like writing books or massive research briefs. And honestly, the best part is the meta-humor angle Daniel suggested because, well, this very episode was generated by the system we are about to describe.
It is a bit like a snake eating its own tail, isn't it? But a very efficient, highly organized snake. By the way, fun fact for everyone listening, today's episode is actually powered by Google Gemini 3 Flash, which is handling this specific script generation. But the architecture Daniel is asking about, this shift to an agentic chunked pipeline, is really the secret sauce for how we have moved past those shorter 10-minute segments into these much more substantive explorations without the quality falling off a cliff.
Right, because for a long time the limitation wasn't just my attention span, it was the models themselves. Even as context windows grew to these massive sizes, millions of tokens, you couldn't just say, hey, write me a 40-minute masterpiece, and expect it to actually work. It usually ended up sounding like a broken record by Minute 15.
That is the big technical milestone here. Scaling to these longer durations while maintaining the depth and the character voice is a completely different beast than just generating a few paragraphs. We have basically had to build a digital production team where each agent has a very specific job to keep the narrative on track.
It is basically the difference between one guy trying to write, direct, and act in a whole play at once versus having a specialized crew. And since we are living inside the machine today, I figure we should probably explain how we got here and why the old way of just asking for more words is basically a recipe for a digital headache. Where do we even start with this? Because I feel like I'm living in a beautiful 2000 token present right now. And I don't want to ruin the magic.
Let's start with the failure state. Before we talk about the fancy agentic stuff, we have to look at why the naive approach, just asking for a long script in one go, is fundamentally broken for anything substantial. It comes down to something called context dilution. Even if a model can see a million tokens, its ability to focus on the specific nuances at the start while it is deep in the middle of a generation starts to get fuzzy. It is the lost in the middle phenomenon, but applied to the model's own creative output.
I know that feeling. It is like when you start a story at a party, and halfway through you realize you have forgotten why you began talking, so you just start repeating the punchline, hoping someone laughs.
That is exactly what happens to an LLM. Without a hierarchical structure, it loses the narrative thread. You get these repetitive loops where the model circles back to safe, generalized conclusions every 5 or 10 minutes because it doesn't have a clear map of where it has been or where it is supposed to go next.
And that is where the incoherence creeps in. I have seen versions of us where I suddenly start sounding like a textbook and you start making weirdly aggressive jokes about database sharding. The personality drifts because the model is struggling so hard just to keep the words coming that it lets the character consistency slide.
And that is why this new milestone is so important. By breaking it down, we are essentially giving the AI a way to stay fresh for every single segment, ensuring that the Herman you hear at minute 1 is the same nerdy donkey you are stuck with at minute 30.
So instead of one giant, exhausting marathon for the AI where it's sweating through 10,000 words in a single go, we've essentially turned the production into a relay race. Herman Poppleberry, tell me if I've got this right. We have a planning agent that acts as the architect, and then a series of subagents that actually do the heavy lifting for each segment.
That is the core of it. We are using Claude Sonnet 4.6, which was just released in February, and while its 1 million token context window is impressive, the real magic is how it handles agentic planning. In the old one-shot approach, you just say, write a 30-minute script about quantum gravity, and the model would eventually just start hallucinating or repeating itself because it's trying to hold the entire structure in its active memory while also trying to be creative. It's too much overhead.
It's like trying to build a skyscraper without blueprints, just stacking bricks and hoping you don't end up with a very tall leaning tower of nonsense. So the planning agent, the architect, actually maps out the beats first.
Precisely. It creates a granular structural map before a single line of dialogue is written. It decides that segment 1 is the hook, segment 2 is the technical breakdown, and so on. Then, we spin up a fresh instance of Sonnet 4.6 for every single segment. Those are the writers. Because each subagent is only responsible for about 5 minutes of content, it stays high energy and focused. It doesn't get tired or lose the thread because its entire world is just that one specific section.
I love the idea of a fresh version of us for every segment. It's like I get a nap and a shot of espresso every 5 minutes while you get to stay in your nerdy flow state without getting bogged down by what we said 20 minutes ago. But how do we actually stay on the same page? If I'm a new subagent every 5 minutes, how do I know I didn't already tell that joke about the database sharding?
That is where the state object comes in. We pass a digital bridge between these agents so they aren't working in a vacuum. It's a shared context that keeps the conversation flowing naturally without those awkward pauses or reintroductions that usually plague AI-generated content.
That digital bridge is the unsung hero here, because without it, naive long-form generation is a nightmare. I've seen those early drafts where we just ask for a 30-minute script in one go. By minute 15, the model starts getting what I call token fatigue. It's like it has a certain amount of intelligence juice, and it spends it all on the intro. By the middle, it forgets what we already covered and starts re-explaining basic concepts it literally just defined 2 pages ago.
It is a phenomenon known as context dilution. Even with the massive 1 million token windows we see in Claude Sonnet 4.6, the model's attention isn't uniform. Research from IBM on agentic chunking shows that as the output grows, the model tends to lose the granular nuances of the initial prompt. It becomes lost in the middle. That is why a single prompt 30-minute script often feels circular. It keeps returning to safe, generalized conclusions every few minutes because it's losing the specific trajectory of the argument.
It's the Groundhog Day effect. I've read scripts where you explain the same technical definition 3 times, and I ask the same, but what about the security question every 5 minutes because the AI forgot I already asked it? It's essentially a loop, but with this planning agent, we're forcing it to sit down and draw the map first, right?
The planning agent defines the segment boundaries and the shared state. For this very episode, the architect created a 6-segment outline. Each subagent, the writer for that specific chunk, doesn't just get a topic, it gets a state object. This includes a what just happened summary, which is a 200-word recap of the previous segment's tone and the specific points we landed on.
And that's how I know not to repeat my jokes. If the state object says Korn already made a quip about database sharding, the next subagent knows to move on to fresh material. It also gives us those style anchors. I noticed in the prep for this that the planning agent told one of my subagents to be playfully skeptical, while yours was told to stay in a deep dive research mode. It prevents that personality drift where we both start sounding like generic helpful assistants.
The subagent per segment approach ensures high energy. Because a subagent is only responsible for, say, 500 words, it can dedicate its entire cognitive overhead to making those 500 words perfect. It isn't worried about the conclusion 20 minutes from now, it just has to bridge the gap from the previous point to the next one using that explicit, what just happened context. It creates a relay where the baton is never dropped.
It really is a relay race, and the baton is that state object. But what's wild is how this isn't just a podcast trick. If you're trying to write a 50-page research brief or a technical white paper, the old way of just dumping a prompt and hoping for the best is basically asking the AI to trip over its own shoelaces by page 10. You see the same failure modes. The executive summary says one thing, and then the methodology section 3 chapters later contradicts the data because the model lost the thread.
The quality difference when you move to an agentic chunked approach for those long-form tasks is staggering. Take that research brief example. If you use a traditional single prompt, the model is trying to juggle the introduction, the complex data analysis, and the final recommendations all at once. By the time it gets to the results section, the attention on the initial constraints from the introduction has faded. But if you break it into discrete segments, intro, methods, results, discussion, and give each section its own subagent with a shared outline, the coherence stays rock solid. Each subagent is focused entirely on one specific goal while remaining aware of the state of the rest of the document.
So, if I'm a listener wanting to do this for, say, a business report or a book, what's the actual how-to? Is it just about making a bigger outline?
It is about the what came before context, that is, the secret sauce. You have to explicitly tell the subagent for Chapter 3, Chapter 2 ended with the protagonist discovering the secret map and the tone was suspenseful. Start Chapter 3 immediately after that discovery using active voice, and do not recap the map's description. Without that specific negative constraint to not reintroduce the topic, the AI's default setting is to act like a helpful assistant starting a brand new task. It will try to say, in this chapter, we will explore the map, and suddenly your book feels like a collection of disjointed essays rather than a narrative.
It's the Groundhog Day pitfall again. Every subagent thinks it's the star of its own opening night. You have to basically tell them, you're coming in at minute 12. The audience is already seated. Don't say hello.
Precisely. And while the trade-off is more setup time, you have to design the planning agent and the state passing logic. The output quality is the difference between a generic AI draft and something that actually looks like a human spent weeks on it. You can even bake in style anchors like avoid jargon or maintain a skeptical tone into the state object so the voice doesn't drift. It turns a 10,000-word document from a chaotic mess into a unified piece of work.
So, if I'm sitting at home and I want to actually build this, what are the brass tacks? Because agentic chunking sounds like something you need a PhD in a server farm to pull off, but we're doing it right now with Claude Sonnet 4.6.
The barrier to entry is actually lower than you think, but you have to change your mental model of how to interact with the AI. The first actionable step for any long-form task, whether it's a 30-minute script, a 10,000-word white paper, or a detailed research brief, is to stop asking the model to write the thing. Instead, your first prompt should always be to a planning agent. You tell it, don't write the content yet. Give me a granular, 6-part structural map with hard segment boundaries.
Right. You're essentially hiring an architect before you start swinging hammers. You want that planner to define exactly where one thought ends and the next begins, so the subagents don't overlap or leave gaps.
And once you have that map, the second step is the context relay. When you prompt the subagent for segment 3, you don't just give it the outline. You have to pass it an explicit state object. In plain English, that means you tell it, segment 2 just covered the technical specs of the GPU. You are now starting the section on cost-benefit analysis. Start mid-thought. Do not summarize the specs again, and maintain the skeptical tone Korn established in the previous lines.
It's basically giving the AI a previously on recap that it isn't allowed to say out loud. And for the folks who want to automate this, you don't need a custom-built supercomputer. You can experiment with this using Claude Sonnet 4.6 or similar models through a framework like LangChain, or even just a well-structured Python script that handles the handoffs.
The key is that coordination. If you're a developer, look into sub-agent delegation. You have one parent agent that holds the master plan and kicks off child agents for each chunk, passing the transcript of the previous chunk as a reference. It transforms the process from a single, shaky, long jump into a series of focused, high-intensity sprints.
It's the difference between a tired marathon runner stumbling at mile 22 and a fresh relay team where every runner is at a full-out sprint. But even with the best runners, you have to make sure they don't all try to give the same "thanks for having me" speech when they grab the baton. Well, not exactly, because Herman would kill me if I used that word. But you get the point. It's that handoff that matters. Though, looking at where we are now, it makes me wonder, where does this actually go? If we can chunk out a 30-minute podcast or a 50-page report today, what happens when the models themselves start doing the internal planning without us having to build the scaffolding?
That's the frontier. Right now, we're the architects designing the relay race, but as Claude Sonnet 4.6 and its successors get better at agentic reasoning, the model might start realizing on its own when it's losing the plot. We might see dynamic chunking, where the AI decides, wait, I'm getting repetitive, let me fork a sub-process to handle this specific technical deep dive. The limit right now is really just our ability to pipe that state accurately between calls.
It's democratizing the big stuff. Used to be, you needed a whole writer's room, or a team of analysts to keep a long-form project coherent. Now, if you've got a good plan and a few API credits, you can produce high-level content that doesn't just trail off into nonsense by page 10. It's powerful, but man, you really have to watch out for those reintroduction loops. Nothing ruins the magic like a subagent trying to welcome everyone back, in the middle of a sentence.
It's all about the setup, but when it works, it's seamless.
Speaking of seamless, I should probably come clean. If I sounded particularly focused for the last few minutes, it's because my current subagent only had to care about this specific closing segment. I've been living in a beautiful 2000 token present this whole time.
Guilty as charged. This entire episode was generated by the very agentic chunked pipeline we just spent 25 minutes describing. We're living the meta commentary.
It's a bit of a trip. Anyway, if you want to see the technical breakdown or the RSS feed, head over to myweirdprompts.com.
Thanks to our producer Hilbert Flumingtop for keeping the agents in line, and a big thanks to Modal for the GPU credits that power this entire pipeline.
This has been My Weird Prompts. If you like the show, leave us a review on your podcast app. It helps the algorithm find us.
See you next time.
Stay weird. This episode was produced using Google Gemini 3 Flash. Text to speech by Chatterbox.
Thanks for listening to our